Welcome back, everybody. Today we are still diving into the 2008 format, and today I want to cover my Garchomp deck. Now, Garchomp saw a little bit of play. Sammy Sakum got second with it at the UK Nationals, and if it wasn't for a player of Sammy's caliber, it probably would have flown under the radar. And while I really like Sammy's list, I did make a lot of changes to the deck, I think, to bring it in to the meta that I'm expecting currently. And also some of my own personal preferences and things. So I'm going to go ahead, jump into it, and we'll start talking about some of the card choices and things. Now, a couple of things here starting off. TCG1 still has a lot of bugs and a lot of glitches. The biggest one is probably the Telepass glitch, where you cannot use Telepass and play a supporter in the same turn. I've noticed very few players are playing Gardevoir right now until that bug gets fixed. And I think that really skews a lot of results. This list in particular, I put a lot of stuff in there to help with the Garchomp or the Gardevoir matchup. And I think right now the latter is a lot of like Cessation Crystal and Absol decks. And I think when Gardevoir gets unbugged, I think you're going to see the meta. It's not going to change dramatically, but I do think it's going to start leveling out a little bit. One of the things Gardevoir Glade does incredible is they are very good at, not only does the deck play like Windstorms and counter stadiums to help against those Cessation Crystal beach decks, but at the exact same time too, the deck also plays the deck also has Glade, and it's one of the few decks in the format that can very easily just power through multiple Cessation Crystals, even without having access to a lot of powers. Now, going ahead, jumping back into this deck here, in the current format, I've liked it a lot. I played around with it. I've come to the conclusion that it's not realistic to attach 3 energy to a Garchomp multiple times over the course of the game. It's just not realistic that you're going to sit there and say manually power up 4 Garchomps. I found the level X to be incredibly impactful. Mainly for the restore, but also the Dragon Pulse does put in a lot of work in different matchups. So I knew, on top of that, the extra 10 HP can be very beneficial as well. I knew this was going to be a big part of the deck when I was building and playing it. Now, I went with a 4-2-3-1 Garchomp line. I just think this is probably the best way to go. I think you can make a small argument to play a larger Gabite line, and even go lower on the rare candy just to avoid, just to make it a little bit better against stuff like Absol. But this I do think is the best way to play it. 2-2 Claydol, 2 Pachirisu. I've actually really been liking Pachirisu in the deck. I've tested the deck with Call Energy, and then I've tested the deck without Call Energy. Now, I should probably explain the main reason we play the Garchomp here is 70 damage for 3 energy is not overly impressive, but essentially the Rainbow scales where it does an additional 40 damage if you have an energy that the defending Pokemon is weak to on it. So let's say you're playing against a Gardevoir, and you have a Psychic Energy attached to Garchomp, you're going to hit for 110. This is obviously gives you some really, really good numbers, especially when you factor in the Garchomp level X. Now, I'm going to say I've tested the deck with Call Energy just because Call Energy is so good not to play. I did find it to be subpar to not running Call Energy just because of how it impacts the Rainbow scales. The Pokebody, yeah, there was ways to get the Call Energy off the Garchomp, but it was just a hassle for the benefit you were getting, especially in a format where you already have so many different ways to search out basic Pokemon. So, I put in Pachirisu. I didn't come up with this. Sammy did play one. I played the second. That Call for Family is just such a strong opener. You do play 2 copies, so it's not likely you'll open with it, but it's also not uncommon you'll see it either. It comes up more than you might think. But it also has that smash short attack, which is going to be so incredibly strong. I don't think Pachirisu is great in a lot of decks because it's very hard. You don't want to pay a retreat cost on your active and then retreat into Pachirisu, then have an energy for Pachirisu to do smash short. But if your main attacker has a free retreat like Garchomp does, it's very easy to free retreat into a Pachirisu and then just do smash short if our opponent is trying to wall us off with the Cessation Crystal. Now, the great thing about that is not only are we hitting them for 40 damage and discarding the Cessation Crystal, they can't play another Cessation Crystal, so they basically just have to watch that Claydol there and know there's nothing they can do about it and that we are going to get that we're going to get a Cosmic Power off on the following turn. It makes Absol a lot less threatening. One Chatot, you've always got to play Chatot. Every single deck in the format should be playing at least one Chatot. Just having that Mimic is too good not to have. The 60 HP for your treat cost and fighting resistance are all solid factors as well. Now, I play one Grimer, one Muck. Sammy did play a lot of like Strength Charms and things like that. Damage modifiers. Muck, in my opinion, is just completely better. Because there's so many decks in the format, it puts in so much work against. Essentially, Gardevoir and Glade is going to be the main reason we play it, but it also does a lot against Leafeon, Empoleon, Torterra, anything that plays Double Rainbow Energy or Scramble Energy. Muck is just outstanding, and when we're already hitting for 110 with that Dragon Fang, if we poison them in between turns, they'll be at 130, heading back into their turn, and that's going to be a one-hit knockout for almost everything in the format. We play one copy of Rotom. It's situationally useful. I found it worth playing, especially in situations where we're behind, using that dual trans to get 2 basic energy and attach them to Garchomp can be incredibly impactful. I'm going to say generally my strategy, though, is I try to power up the first Garchomp. And that's one thing about the deck. It is a little slow because you do have to power up that first Garchomp. And then I try to have a second. I'll start powering up a second Garchomp. And then I'll have like a Garchomp on the bench. And I'll either use the Garchomp level X, the active, to get that additional HP, put that damage on the bench. Or I'll use Garchomp level X on my no energy Garchomp on the bench. And then when this gets knocked out, I can come up and restore to get it back with 3 energy. Like I said, you basically have to restore at some point in the game. It's not realistic that you are just going to play 4 Garchomp and attach 3 energy to each of them. 4 BB search. I want 4 BBs, 1 Celios. I think you can argue for 4 Celios, 1 BBs. It's completely up to you. The Celios can get everything in the deck, so can the BBs. The BBs is slightly better because it lets you get off a little bit stronger cosmic powers. There is downsides to this. Obviously, things like if Psychic Lock, Cessation Crystal, anything that's stopping that cosmic power, the BBs is going to be less useful. But I still think the odds of the additional benefit of getting an additional card off the cosmic power is worth slight downside of having to put one back for BBs if it's not in a beneficial situation. 4 Roseannes, absolutely essential for the deck. Not only does it search out our basic energy, but it also gets our basics, gets us Chatot to get out of a situation, Rotom to help out, Pachirisu, just anything we need. 3 Steven's Advice. I'm really liking 3 Stevens in a lot of decks. I also think you can make a good argument for 4. Some formats, like 2004, for example, it's very hard to play Steven's Advice in because you essentially get to points in the game where your hand is so large, Steven's not useful. But with Claydol, you can actually Cosmic Power like an 8-card hand down to 6, draw none off the power, and then go ahead and Steven's Advice up to a very large hand again. Steven's Advice can be a little bit weaker in the start of the game if your opponent doesn't have a full bench, or if they're trying to play around a Dusknoir so they don't bench more than 3. So there is pros and cons to it. 3 is a very good number. I do think you can make an argument for 4. I haven't been a huge fan of 1 or 2 in a lot of decks, but it depends completely on what you're playing. Next up, we play 2 TV Reporter. I'm not completely sold on this. The idea was you could discard it was supposed to help with a level X. I'm not completely sold on it. There's benefits to playing it, there's benefits to not playing it. The idea was, like I said, it would help with the level X, let me discard something that I could either restore back, like a Garchomp, or discard an energy I could get back with restore. It just gave me some different plays, but comboed with the Rotom as well. It's so-so. I don't love it, I don't hate it. 1 Celios we talked about, I only went with 3 Rare Candy in this deck. Now, I am going to say Sammy Sakoum played a Dusknoir in the deck. I opted not to play the Dusknoir. I went with just the Muck instead. I don't hate Dusknoir in this deck. I don't think Dusknoir is bad at all. Especially since, in my experience, a lot of people are not trying to play around Dusknoir. And I think if you really wanted to, you could find room for Dusknoir in this deck as well. And I absolutely wouldn't hate it. I don't even think you'd have to go over 3 candies. I think there's even going to be situations where you could like TV Reporter it away and then get it back with Restore on the Garchomp level X, still get a lot of advantage out of it. Certain matchups like Blissey, for example, it would be outstanding in. That being said, I think Blissey is such a rough matchup. I don't think a Dusknoir is going to necessarily completely change the outcome of that either. Now, I went with 2 Night Maintenance, 2 Premier Ball. This was a huge nod to how impactful I felt the Level X was. The 2 Night Maintenance I do really like. There's a lot of benefits to either A, putting Garchomp line back, your Level X back, a Tech back, an Energy back you can then in turn Roseanne's for. It's just so absolutely useful. I do think 2 Night Maintenance is correct. I'm going to say the 2 Premier Ball you can debate with me a lot. I like at least 1 in the deck. The second I had at least an additional spot, so I played it, but I do think there's a lot of different things you could do with that. 2 Warp Point. I like 2 Warp Point in the deck. I think you can make a good argument for 3. There's a lot of synergy with Warp Point, and then like Dragon Pulse, especially if they send up something with like 50 damage on it, and then you can warp it back to the bench and try to get like a knockout from Dragon Pulse or something like that. So there is some different synergy. Pseudo Cessation Crystal Counter. 2 Crystal Beach. Now, I'm going to say a lot of versions of this play 3, some play 4. I think Sammy played 4. I'm going to say is if you're going into a tournament, every single round is against Gardevoir, play 4 of these. Don't even question it. But right now, there's just simply so many insert Absol Cessation Crystal Beach decks on the ladder that playing the higher Crystal Beach count has actually been pretty underwhelming for me. Generally, the 2... you can either A, put Gardevoir in an awkward situation, or B, most Empoleon decks don't actually play Cessation, or don't actually play Counter Stadiums. So essentially, you just have to find 1 against it, and then you're in a pretty good spot. Also, it conflicts a little bit with a Muck. In a lot of situations, we want their Double Rainbows or their Scramble Energies to be active. I think you can debate this, but I think it depends very heavily on what you're expecting as a meta. Energy, 4 Psychic, 3 Lightning, 2 Fighting, 2 Fire, 2 Metal, 1 Dark, 1 Water. Essentially, your Gardevoir, your Glades, your Empoleons. This is mainly going to be Blissey, but at the same time, too, like I talked about, that I think Blissey is such an awful matchup already. The Fighting Energy has not made dramatic amounts of changes to the matchup for me. 2 Fire Energy, Torterra. You need the additional damage against Torterra. Leafeon's also been quite popular lately. 2 Metal. I've played against a lot of Glaceon decks lately, so I do have the extra metal in there. 1 Dark. Dusknoir is a major problem for the deck. You're going to have a very hard time knocking out Dusknoir without that Dark Energy. And then 1 Water. Not a whole lot in the format, but basically if you play against like a Magmortar deck or something, 100% the energy lineups, you could run this about whatever meta you're expecting or whatever you want to play. I also think text for the deck, like I said, Dusknoir I think is very strong. I think you could also make good arguments for like Jirachi EX. I think you could even make arguments for like a 101 Ampharos in here. I think that could be very good, not only to help your Empoleon matchup, but also to get some very key chip damage in to make those Dragon Fangs better. Just a lot of different things that I think you can do with this deck. It's got a lot of room to be teched out, and I think it's got a lot of room in the format. It's probably, in my opinion, a strong Tier 2 deck. I don't think it quite edges its way into Tier 1, but you can definitely give a lot of those Tier 1 decks a good run for their money. But anyways, this is going to go ahead, wrap up my 2008 Garchomp deck profile. I hope you enjoyed it. Any questions, make sure to ask them down below, and I'll do my best to get to them. If you haven't already, please like and subscribe to the channel. It helps me out a lot. And of course, I hope to see you in the next video.